What would you do if your star pilot, after a devastating accident, instead of showing frustration, smiles? Scuderia Ferrari did not know how to react to this. Was it a resilience signal, or an undercover message for Leclerc and the technical direction of the team? The summer pause had been used to implement promising technical adjustments in the SF25, and the statements prior to the weekend breathed optimism. Lewis Hamilton, particularly, seemed more comfortable than ever with the team's environment. He had talked openly about his adaptation process, about how he had begun to adopt Charles Leclerc's braking style, seeking to maximize his minimum curves, a characteristic that historically had not been his strong point. Everything indicated that I was about to reach a turning point. But instead, Zandvoort became a watershed. On Tour 23, Hamilton's car ended up embedded against protection barriers. It was not a spectacular shock in visual terms, but a dry blow to the Ferrari-Hamilton project. For a pilot who had not abandoned in the whole season, the fact that his first DNF occurred just when he seemed to find the rhythm was symbolically devastating. And yet, the truly disconcerting was not the accident, but the subsequent reaction. In the usual interview round, when everyone was waiting for a frustrated, annoying or critical Hamilton, a calm figure emerged, almost serene. He said he felt very mentally, highlighted positive aspects, and declared that he was progressing. It was a moment that froze in time. How could he talk about progress just after crashing with a car that has been a nightmare to pilot? The impact was immediate. For journalists, he was a juicy holder. For fans, an enigma. But within Ferrari, silence said everything. No one knew how to interpret that message. Charles Leclerc, who had historically been the emotional epicenter of the team, observed with a stone face. He did not comment on the matter. But his body language spoke more than any statement. It was possibly the first time that Leclerc felt that his place as an absolute pillar within the Scuderia was being questioned. Hamilton's attitude was not seen as an act of resignation, but as a control statement. He was taking the reins of his narrative, making it clear that his value did not depend on the results of the car, but on his personal evolution as a pilot. In other words, I was not subject to Ferrari's technical fluctuations, but willing to grow even in the middle of chaos. This generated an existential dilemma within the team. On the one hand, they had Leclerc, an emotionally linked pilot to the project, whose frustration grew day by day. On the other, to Hamilton, who in just mid-season already projected an image of resilience and leadership, with an emotional maturity that fasted even its most veteran engineers. And this was just the beginning. Because the real earthquake was not the accident. It was what Hamilton did not say, what he left in the air. The insinuation that perhaps the problem was not just the car. Maybe, just maybe, the real obstacle was inside Ferrari himself. The SF25 was born with a clear promise, to be the definitive evolution of past errors and the turning point that would return the ability to fight consistently for victories. Since its conception, the car was designed under an aggressive aerodynamic philosophy, with a technical approach that sought to compete against the extreme performance of McLaren and the mechanical efficiency of Red Bull. But that ambition soon became a trap for the team itself. What Ferrari sold as a refined engineering work ended up revealing himself as a deeply unstable machine, both in behavior and configuration. The heart of the problem lies in its technical architecture. The technical team, led by Loic Serra, opted for a pole-pole type front suspension system that, on paper, should allow superior aerodynamic cleaning of the airflow around the car. This design allowed more freedom to sculpt the bottom of the car, which in theory would result in greater aerodynamic load under the ground. But in practice, this bet generated a chronic imbalance. The rear of the car failed to adapt to the dynamic compression demands required by this type of suspension, causing a constant phenomenon of rebound and excessive contact of the soil with the asphalt. In other words, SF25 is not only difficult to drive, it is intrinsically unstable. This extreme design forced Ferrari to work in a margin of tiny adjustments. Any deviation in tire temperature, asphalt height or type of curve could transform the potentially competitive car completely uncontrollable. And that was exactly what happened in Zandvoort. In one of the most technical circuits of the calendar, with curves that demand a continuous lateral load and progressive traction, the SF25 showed its worst face. Internal telemetry revealed that in two sections of the layout, the car lost 90% of the time compared to its rivals. We do not talk about a marginal difference. It is a structural loss, an inability of the car to support the minimum speed required by such layout. Fred Vasseur had no choice but to recognize it publicly. He called it the worst Friday in 3 years. A hard but necessary diagnosis. Internally, the engineers were divided. Some proposed emergency solutions such as modifying the floor heights or hardening the rear train, but each adjustment compromised another area of the car. What seemed like an aerodynamic advantage in paper turned out to be a rigid and fragile system, which does not tolerate changes, not even the little ones. And in this context, the pilots became victims of design. Charles Leclerc, who has been adapting to Ferrari's whims for years, admitted that the car simply cannot do certain things that others can. Hamilton, meanwhile, not only suffered physically in the accident, but quickly understood it at the conceptual level. His previous experience with dominant cars and Mercedes allows you to detect these structural failures without the need to turn unnecessary. He said it without saying it, it's not just that SF25 is bad. It is poorly designed from its base. All this generates an uncomfortable question within Ferrari. Can you really compete this year with a car that does not admit errors or adjustments? Because while McLaren and Mercedes explore different career configurations, Ferrari is caught in a technical prison. Each small step in the right direction has the cost of 2 steps back in another area. The car demands perfection in a sport where perfection does not exist. And that is the central drama of SF25. It is not slow by nature. It is fast when everything fits, but only under specific and fragile conditions. And that type of car, more than a championship weapon, becomes a Russian roulette. A machine that, rather than inviting to run, demands to survive. The comparison between both pilots after the GP of the Netherlands was devastating. Leclerc, frustrated, pointed to the car problems, questioned configuration decisions, publicly showed its discontent with the behavior of the SF25. Hamilton, on the other hand, transmitted an image of resilience, emotional control, acceptance of the process. This does not mean that one is right and the other does not, but it does make a fundamental difference in how they face adversity. While Leclerc seems to wait for Ferrari to give him the tools to win, Hamilton suggests that he is willing to build them himself. This has deep implications for the immediate future of the team. The engineers, the strategists, and Fred Vasseur himself face an uncomfortable dilemma. Who to support as a reference for development and leadership in a moment of technical crisis? Leclerc has history, continuity, closeness with the factory. Hamilton has the experience, titles, and proven ability to drag entire equipment towards success. It is not about creating a conflict between the two, but of recognizing that its coexistence in a fragile environment like Ferrari's generates inevitable tensions. Hamilton's message also touches a deeper nerve within the team, the culture of perfectionism without result. Ferrari has been obsessed for years to meet his lost glory, but he has done so through extreme pressure cycles, constant changes and promises that are not fulfilled. In that environment, a pilot like Hamilton who knows when to speak, when to press, and when to support represents a paradigm shift. His optimism after abandonment was not an act of naivety, but a way of exposing that Ferrari's problem is not only technical, is philosophical. While the team remains tied to immediate results and not a sustained evolution, any project is sentenced to emotional collapse. Therefore, his statement not only hit Leclerc, impacted the entire team. It was an attention call. I hear is not just about speed, but of direction. And that address, according to Hamilton, can still be corrected. But to do so, he needs Ferrari to stop looking at the past with nostalgia and begin to build a present with realism. You need a team that stops reacting and begins to anticipate. That abandons the narrative of the myth to embrace that of structured work. And in that new scheme, the question is no longer who is the fastest, but who is the most capable of guiding the team in the middle of chaos. And maybe, for the first time in a long time, Leclerc does not have that guaranteed response. What happened in Zandvoort should not be analyzed only from the sports prism. It wasn't just one more accident in a complicated season. It was a hinge moment, an emotional turning point that condensed everything Ferrari has tried to ignore in recent years. Hamilton's statement worked as a mirror that forced the Scuderia to face its reflection. A brilliant team in potential, but disoriented in strategy, technical direction, and internal cohesion. The challenge for Ferrari is not alone to improve the SF25, but in redefining what type of team wants to be. A team that expects its pilots to adapt to the car, or one that adapts the car to the greatness of its pilots. An environment where decisions are made by historical hierarchy or effective leadership. Lewis Hamilton, with just a few words, put those questions on the table without the need to pronounce them directly. And the most powerful of all is that he did not do it with anger, with open criticism, or with media pressure. He did it with serenity, with the calm of who has already seen the worst of organizational chaos and has come victorious. That is perhaps the true threat to the figure of Leclerc and the status quo of Ferrari. Not that Hamilton wants control. It is that he exercises it naturally, simply when he is present, when speaking, when driving. So now it's your turn. Do you think Hamilton is beginning to take the real Ferrari control? Is this the season in which we will see a total reconfiguration of the internal leadership of the Scuderia? And how will Leclerc respond to this type of silent pressure but forceful? Leave me your opinion.